Alright, so today we're installing new FactionFab F-Spec struts on a 2015 WRX. The first thing you're going to want to do is set them up so you have the ride height you want. Now what I'm doing is they provide this chart here. Max ride height in the front is for the F-Spec 15.5. In the rear, max height in the rear is 16 inches. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 15.625 for the F-Spec. And that is down from the stock, which they give you up here. So it's going to be a 1/4 inch lower if you have it maxed out from the stock in the front. And what is that, 3/8 down from 3/8 of an inch down from the stock rear height in the rear if you have the rear maxed out. Then it gives you how many millimeters of thread you need to achieve those ride heights. So I'm going to go with the max ride height in the rear, and then I'm just going to take it down a little bit. Max ride height in the front, so it's still a 1/4 inch difference between the rear and the front. So it's going to be the 55 millimeters of thread space in the rear. I'll show you what that looks like. And then also it's going to be about 91, 92 millimeters of thread in the front to get us a 1/2 inch lower than in the rear. So here's the strut. Now this space right here from the top or the bottom of this red locking piece to the top of this one is your thread height. This is a rear strut. The max height that I wanted to use the max height, which was 55 millimeters. So this is 55 millimeters between the top here and the bottom there. They also want you to set preload. So how to set the preload on this strut is you unscrew this top piece all the way down until there's no pressure on the spring, and you'll see this leave the bottom of the spring. Tighten it back up to the bottom of the spring. Tighten this piece up to the bottom of that piece, and then go ahead and tighten this top piece up 4 millimeters up, compressing the spring that 4 millimeters. Then go ahead and screw this bottom piece back up to the top piece, locking it in place there with 4 millimeters of compression on the spring. And that's how much compression on the spring you want when you're first putting it in your car. From there, you adjust the bottom based off of how many millimeters you need for your ride height. So I set that preload first, and then I changed this bottom piece so that I had the 55 millimeters of thread, which gives me that maximum ride height I was looking for. And you do that for all your struts going in, and then you can just go ahead and install them like a normal strut from there. So we have the car lifted up here. The first thing you do is take your wheel off. You need access to what's behind it. Now we're going to start in the front. All you have to do is we're going to take out these 2 bolts here and then detach the wires. I already took that one off. There's one over here too. Go ahead and take those off of your strut. These 2 bolts out, those wires detach, and then all it is up here there's 3 more bolts, and you can drop your old strut out. So we're going to go ahead and start with taking off the rest of these. Alright, so I have the bolts off the end, or the nuts off the ends of these bolts. Also note that there is a washer on this top one. Also, this top one adjusts the camber of the wheels, so its orientation does matter. However, you're going to be bringing it in for an alignment anyways immediately after replacing these struts, so it's not too big of a deal if that's lined up perfectly to where it was before. I also took off this line right away, and this one was already off. So now I just can tap these out with a hammer, and we'll be able to remove the bolts on top. Alright, these bolts are now out. This kind of fell forward. Don't let this fall forward too much because you don't want to rip it out of your transmission up there. Now we can go ahead and remove these bolts, and this strut will drop right out. Alright, so there's the old one removed. Now we can go ahead and take this new one. I took the bolts off the top. I'm going to reuse those nice looking gold ones I had because they fit on these. Otherwise they give you new bolts for on top. And you can just go ahead, take this strut, and we're just going to install it the way you remove the old one. Alright, so I pushed the strut up and I got these bolts started on top. That isn't all the way tightened yet. I'm going to go ahead and try to align these holes back up so I can put those 2 bolts through. Alright, so what worked for me to get these bolt holes lined up was just to put a jack underneath it here. You just need to jack up a little bit, and then they'll go ahead and line up. I like to put the bottom one in first, and then you can kind of push the whole thing forward to line up for the top hole. So here's both those bolts lined back up. Now you can go ahead and put the nuts on. They give you the torque spec in the instructions. It looks like for 2015 plus, the lower strut mount nuts are a 129 foot-pound. So once you have those bolts torqued to spec, both your lines reattached, and then these tightened up all the way. I waited to tighten these up all the way while I saw the jack underneath it, so I knew the strut was pushed all the way up. You are done in the front, and we can go ahead and move to the rear. Alright, so here we are in the rear, and this isn't going to be any worse than the front. So we have the wheel off. We're going to have to remove 3 bolts. You can see them right here. 1, 2, and 3. The sway bar end link. You just have to take the bottom off the sway bar end link. With those 3 out, the top of the strut is held in through the trunk. So you'll come around to the trunk. You'll have to take out a couple of those little plastic snap things, and then right behind there's your 2 bolts that hold it in to the top. So that's all we're working with here. We're going to start down by taking those. I'm going to take the 3 nuts off the end of these bolts. Alright, so on the bottom, here's those 3 bolts removed. You can go ahead and whack those bolts out with a hammer, and then up on top I have the nuts off these bolts as well. I took those off while the strut was still in place, so that way as soon as I pound those 3 bolts out on the bottom, it'll be ready to drop out with a little wiggling. Alright, the old strut is out. I'm going to stick the bottom of the new strut in and then push this top piece in, which was the same way I took it out. Alright, so that new strut's installed. We can go ahead and you just have to wiggle this around to get those other bolts pushed back through the holes they were in before. You can see I already got the sway bar end link in the back. I'm just going to work my way forward then. So all those bolts pushed through, and then I loosely put on the nuts on those bolts. So now all we have to do is go ahead and torque these down. The torque spec they included with their instructions online. This is a 15 plus model. Lower strut and outer arm nut are 60 foot-pounds. Those top hat nuts are only 22. And the end link is 33. Alright, with the new struts installed and everything torqued to spec, you're ready to throw your wheels back on and go ahead and lower your car.